It's about, at the time it was about 2,000 people there. I grew up 2 doors down from a lady who was a Polish immigrant who had a tattoo on her arm from a place called Auschwitz. And she, while she was interned there, at age 11, they removed her reproductive organs. And so being a Polish Catholic, she was supposed to have a large family culturally, so she couldn't do that, literally. So she adopted all the kids in the neighborhood. So when I talk about these things and I see all of this stuff, that made an indelible stamp on me from the time I was a kid. So anyway, enough about me. What I'm here to talk about tonight is the Declaration of Independence. And the reason that I want to do this is because we hear a lot about the Constitution. That's tremendously important. But remember, the Constitution was simply the codification of the principles laid down in our founding document, which was the Declaration of Independence. And I think that now, when you get into 200 years of court decisions and this and that and the other thing, we forget and we kind of disregard the underlying foundation of where the Constitution actually came from. Without further ado, Patrick Henry said, "It is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us into beasts. For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it might cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst, and to provide for it." Samuel Adams said, "If virtue and knowledge are diffused among the people, they will never be enslaved. This will be their great security." And I know I'm not telling anybody anything new in this room, but this is the problem. We've forgotten this, or depending upon, I saw the copy of The Naked Communist over there, you know why our children aren't being taught this, and I'm so glad to hear that some of them actually are. And our old friend Karl Marx said, "Take away the heritage of a people and they are easily persuaded." And that quote right there, in my opinion, explains our country today. Okay, the Declaration of Independence. John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1815, and he said, "What do we mean by the Revolution? The war? That was no part of the Revolution. It was only an effect and consequence of it. The Revolution was in the minds of the people, and this was effected from 1760 to 1775 in the course of 15 years before a drop of blood was shed at Lexington." The Revolution was not an accident, and it was not a, hey, let's go out and do this spur of the moment type of a deal. He also said, "The records of 13 legislators, the pamphlets and newspapers in all the colonies ought to be consulted during that period to ascertain the steps by which the public opinion was enlightened and informed concerning the authority of Parliament over the colonies." And as we go through this tonight, think about what their grievances were in reference to our own grievances with our own federal government today. Think about that context. So, okay, quick quiz. What was the most successful, prosperous, and free country in the 18th century? Before you answer that, think about the world, okay? We had the emperor in Japan, we had the warlord emperor system in China, we had Tsarist Russia, etc. So, what was the freest, best country basically to live in the 18th century? Anyone want to guess?
China. U.S.
Not China. Well, U.S. wasn't a country yet. Before. Actually, it was Great Britain. Well, actually, no, you're right. We were part of Great Britain. It was Great Britain. So you got to ask yourself, why rebel against and ultimately go to war with the most powerful and free nation on the face of the earth? It came down to a constitutional argument. The British Constitution, unlike ours, was not a single authoritative document framed and ratified at a specific time, nor was it revised by an amendment process at specific times. What the British Constitution was a complex system of statutes, common law judicial precedents, individual documents which held constitutional status, the most important of which was the Magna Carta, and also traditions and customs constituting the structure of government, hence the word Constitution. So, for all intents and purposes, the British Constitution was unwritten. Think about that. So if there's any kind of dispute on what the Constitution actually means, you can't go back and say, hey, Article 4, Section 3. Couldn't do that. So, it was open to interpretation, all right? Isn't that funny? We hear ours being open to interpretation when it was written and codified and voted upon, and here's what it is. The British Constitution placed sovereign power in the hands of Parliament, and this is a tremendously important concept. Okay, we hear it bandied about. What it means is possessed of supreme power, unlimited in extent, absolute, enjoying autonomy or independent. It's the highest form of power. Okay, this is where the buck stops, and it's absolute. Okay, for the context of our talk here. So, why was absolute power in Parliament? It should have been with the king, right? The king had the divine right, and God wanted him to tell us what to do and all that stuff, right? Well, the English Civil War in 1642 to 1651, Parliament beheads King Charles I and deposes King Charles II. After the Revolution of 1688, Parliament deposed King James II, finally ending kingly absolute power and establishing modern English parliamentary democracy. Okay, sounds like an improvement, right? There's not just one guy anymore. Now we got 300 tyrants instead of one. So the question of sovereignty comes down to what is to be the nature of ultimate power within the state. Okay, whenever there's an argument somewhere, it has to stop. Arguably, in our country, it's the Supreme Court. Arguably. There is, where is ultimate power to be located and who will actually exercise it? Well, before 1688, every political unit had to have a single, undivided, final power subject to no other authority or law. Before 1688, that was the king. He was a law unto himself, and he still retained limitations based upon legal, religious, and traditional origins of the concept. Okay, he had supreme power, but it wasn't arbitrary. The only problem with it, of course, is who's going to decide, whether it's arbitrary or not. Of course, it's going to be him. But I digress. The sovereign must still embody the law of nature and God, using the language of the times. It was might with right. They kind of looked at the king like their big brother. He protected him and so on. But, buck stopped with him, and if he got mad at you, he could still cut your head off. After 1688, there was 50 years of crisis. There was not just the English Civil War. There was the troubles with Ireland. There was horrible, horrible riots and religious sectarian strife. The Catholics and the Protestants, cutting each other's heads off, terrible stuff. So after 50 years of crisis, and think about this. Think about, what is our friend Rahm Emanuel, what's his great quote? Never waste a good crisis. Well, Parliament had 50 years of it. And the concept of might with right ends, okay? At this point, the people were so tired of riots and wars and just terrible, terrible times, they said, hey, I don't care, make it stop, okay? A model which was used by the Soviets in Russia, by the every revolution with the exception of ours. This was the beginning of it. Anyway, the concept of sovereignty was stripped of its moral and legalistic qualities. It was replaced by the doctrine of naked force. And the only quality necessary for a sovereign, for the absolute power, was the ability to compel obedience. Okay? Might makes right. The king, when King Charles, before they beheaded him, when he was on trial, he said, I have the divine right. That's what gives me legitimacy to rule. What do you have? And they said, we have the army. What else do we need? So they took away any kind of legalistic anything. By that definition of legitimacy, the Nazis were legitimate. A street gang is legitimate. The biggest, meanest kid on the playground is legitimate. Okay. Now, the reason that this was such a huge issue here with our forefathers was that 3 of the 4 major British migrations to America occurred before 1688. So they had no concept of the doctrine of naked force. The vast majority of colonists thought of the king as sovereign. The colonists had been governing their internal matters for over 100 years. The colonists saw themselves as sovereign regarding internal matters, much as the ancient Greek colonies did, but that was just because of their classic education that they had at the time. Now, the Parliament had the power to write all the laws and interpret all the laws. Can you imagine if Congress or the Senate could do that. I mean, that's just mind-boggling to me. Power to annul colonial legislative decisions, power to annul colonial court decisions. They appointed high officers, et cetera, conducted foreign relations, and so on. They also claimed control over certain settled areas in the East and regulated certain economic activities through the laws of trade and navigation. This was actually the main source of their income from the colonies. Now, the colonists, though, think about it at the time too, because there was such a long time for communications, because you had to actually take a sailing ship across the sea to get a letter passed and so on. We were really very, very independent just by nature. We had to be. We had no choice. Okay. All other all other powers were enjoyed in fact, if not theory, by local colonial organs of government. Law and order was handled locally. We had our own court system. The British military was sent on mission specific. So in other words, they did not, they were not garrisoned around in large numbers the way they were back in Europe. Okay? And the individual colonies raised taxes to fund their own militias, etc. So they've been doing basically everything themselves. Now, the British Crown collected fees, dues, and rents associated with overseas trade. No taxes were collected from regular citizens. Remember though, when we hear taxation without representation, key point, the colonists had been paying taxes to their own legislatures for 100 years. It wasn't that they objected to the concept of taxes. In 1763, the French and Indian War ended. The large numbers of British troops were on American soil. A huge war debt had been incurred by Great Britain, and suddenly Parliament began to lay direct taxes on the colonies. Now the colonists didn't object to the concept of taxes, but they objected to not having any say in it. Now, what did the colonists fear? Some things had radically changed as far as they were concerned. And what were they concerned with? What were they afraid of? Well, per their language, corruption and conspiracy. Corruption, specifically what they were concerned with. Parliament begins arbitrarily imposing demands the colonists are not used to. Okay? Taxation without representation, we talked about that. Unlimited search and seizure at this time to enforce the new taxes, the Stamp Act in particular, where if you bought a piece of paper, whether it was playing cards or anything, you had to have the British stamp on it to show you'd paid your taxes. Well, because a lot of people did not want to pay those, they realized that they were missing a lot of money, so they were actually having redcoats, British soldiers, kicking in people's doors on the word of a neighbor or what have you, and shaking down the house, looking for any piece of paper that did not have that British stamp on it. Okay, and if you objected, this is a little before Miranda rights and everything else. They had oppression of political protesters. People were thrown in prison and beaten, etc., without any kind of due process. And immunity for corrupt and abusive British officers. If you were the king's man, you could pretty much do anything you wanted. Not unlike our own Eric Holder today, if I do say so myself. The Parliament had the direct control of the criminal justice system. Guilt by Parliament through bills of attainder, etc. A bill of attainder was simply the Parliament passes a law saying that you, a citizen, are tainted. That gives them the power then, with no due process, to seize your property, imprison you, or execute you. Sounds not unlike the powers that are now available in this country under the NDAA and the war on drugs. Closure of the Boston port by the British Army. Doctrine of naked force, and you could not ignore what was going on. King George sided with Parliament. What they said, if you remember your history books, they sent letters off and everything to the king, and he always sided with Parliament. So they objected to that. Big Brother is not getting other Big Brother to leave us alone. Basically, is what it came down to. Dad's not making Big Brother leave me alone. Every time there was a constitutional point of order brought up, Parliament used its power to interpret the Constitution and say, hey, sorry guys, you lose again, sorry. We should think about this though, and not that you all are aware of this, but there's a very good possibility that Mr. Obama is going to appoint 2 Supreme Court justices. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The disregard for natural law, it was the rule of men. What they said went. They had no concept of anything else. Parliament has the might, therefore they are right, is what it boiled down to. All right? And it's gone off of YouTube, but there used to be a really good video on there of an IRS agent being interviewed. It was two of them, and the lady said, well, what gives you the right to impose taxes? Because they were talking about the 461, rule or whatever. And the guy actually went like this and showed his side arm and said, that's what gives me the power. If you can believe that. It's gone off of YouTube, unfortunately, but I've seen it. Okay, conspiracy. This is actually taken from a pamphlet which was, it was basically the notes from a Boston town meeting in 1770. Many recent events afford great reason to believe that a deep-laid and desperate plan of imperial despotism has been laid, and partly executed for the extinction of all civil liberty. The British Constitution seems fast tottering into fatal and inevitable ruin. Now, just keep in mind, where do you all feel the U.S. Constitution is, honestly, just in the back of your head? Okay, so what did they do? Well, finally, we all know, they got together in Philadelphia. Now, President Thomas Jefferson, obviously the main author of the Declaration of Independence, said, I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. Now, we all, like I said, we always hear about the Constitution, but how many folks have actually read the Declaration of Independence, through and through? What it is, and we're going to go over it really quickly, it is a preamble. Basically, there's 3 long paragraphs that say what they were doing, then there's a list of grievances, and then there's kind of a postscript. What we're going to do is we're going to go over this part of it, and then we'll go through just a couple of the actual grievances that I think are very relevant to what's going on today. Okay. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is the revolutionary part of our founding, guys. It's not, lots of people got mad at the central government, lots of people, shot the standing army guys, etc. The revolutionary part was this. We actually instituted popular sovereignty. The final power rested with the people. The government is able to do what it does because I give it permission. Okay? Now in today, and hopefully we're going to discuss Frederick Bastiat's The Law, which is an amazing book which clarified so much for me. But Mr. Bastiat talked about, he said that, in a nutshell, the government should not be able to do anything that I as an individual citizen cannot do. So I can't, so anyway, we'll talk about that later, but that's what they were talking about. And we said, hey look, it comes back to us. You can do that because I give you permission. If I don't like what you're doing, I can vote you out, blah, blah, blah. That whenever any form, and actually more importantly back to this, is that the law of the land is, it applies to everybody. So if a certain government official sells firearms to Mexican drug cartels, since if I did that as a U.S. citizen, and there are lots of them who are in jail now because of that very crime, and they should be, but if you hold high office and authorize that, you are not held accountable. That's not the vision of our founders. Okay, that's not the rule of law. That is 200 years away from what we are supposed to be. that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, hey, just aside, and I gotta ask this, how many folks feel that the federal government is destructive of the ends of the consent of the governed and personal liberty of the individual people? It is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem likely to affect their safety and happiness. What did he foreshadow right there?
What's going on right now?
The writing of the Constitution, right? Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while the evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. This is why we had the Marxist concept of the long march to the institution, or incrementalism, right? If people will put up with a lot if you give it to them in short doses, right? Mm-hmm. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Which, in the Constitution, how did they codify that? What did they give us that no other people have ever gotten, at least not up to that time? And today, I don't know what, there's like 6 countries in the world that allow their citizens to do what?
Keep and bear arms.
The Second Amendment. Very timely. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government, which is what I think everybody in this room is trying to do through the political process. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Okay, fast forward to 2013. Supreme Court citing international law. How many of us voted for anybody who voted for it, who passed international law? None. Absolutely none. Agenda 21, I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. If you're not, it is a United Nations program which is being implemented in this country at every level right now, even though the Senate refused to ratify the treaty. So it's all illegal from top to bottom, thank you, Mr. Clinton and Bush Sr. The UN Small Arms Treaty, which, well, we'll see if they pass it or not, but any time, okay, all right. For depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury. Federal agencies may impose fines and penalties without trial. The IRS can and does seize people's bank accounts without their knowledge, without their consent, without a hearing, without due process, without anything. I have a very good friend up in Pine Top, well, God rest his soul, but he was a contractor for many years. He, like many guys, simple guys, messed up his taxes. And one day he had a bunch of construction workers at his house wondering why the hell their paychecks didn't cash. And he said, well, they should. He would talk to the bank, and the IRS had helped itself to his payroll. Okay? He didn't know, obviously, because any of you who've worked construction know if you want to have a very bad, potentially violent situation, don't pay a bunch of carpenters. Okay, see what happens. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people. EPA, OSHA, IRS, HUD, FCC, DOT, ATF, TSA. Pick one. I'm sure I missed half of them, but think about it. Think about them all. Now, do you think this lady is enjoying this or consented to do this?
Yeah, because she bought an airline ticket.
She consented, but okay. Do you think if she had a choice, she would have done that? She wanted to get on her airplane.
No.
If anybody in this room were to touch this child like this, would that not be a crime? But put a uniform on, it's not a crime. Okay? That doesn't sound like consent. So tell me, does this look like consent of the governed or doctrine of naked force? Because I can tell you, can you imagine what Thomas Jefferson or George Washington would have done if somebody had touched one of their children like that? And this was just a airport passenger screener charged in distributing child pornography, this lovely government official. Okay, and this is another situation where this would be molestation and would be a crime if they were not wearing a TSA uniform. So, this is something that would hopefully get this guy punched if under different circumstances. The point being, though, folks, is that you have to sit there and ask yourself, do we live in a country that exercises consent of the governed, where the power, the sovereignty is with the people, or with those who can compel obedience because they have a monopoly on the legal use of violence? We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. And that, as free and independent states, we have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Let me leave you with this. Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves are its only safe depositories. Thomas Jefferson said that. I hope I've given you food for thought. That's all I have. Thank you very much.